Hi guys, welcome to the next video of the RESTful tutorial series. In the last video we saw the @produces annotation, which is used to specify the MIME media type to be returned to the client by the web service method. In this video we will see the @consumes annotation, which specifies the MIME media type which the resource method would consume from the client. So this is basically used to specify the type of the request which the resource method would accept in its parameter. Let's check this by a small example. Let's create one method, process input. Let's give the path as method name. Now this method is taking plain text as input, so the media type in the @consumes annotation should be text underscore plain. This method also produces plain text as response, so we'll keep the same media type here in the @produces annotation. In this method we are just accepting string as a request, which will come in this input parameter, and I will add processed string to it. And return it back to the client. Now let's check the client code on how to pass some request to the web service call. Let's put the web service path process input to the web service URL here. So this is the client code. Now make this to post. Now we need to pass some string request to the web service. So there are a couple of ways to do that. We can use the overloaded post method, where we can specify entity as a request. Now let's see that in the post method. So we can see that there are three forms of the method where we can specify the request. There is one more thing in this overloaded method, that is generic type, which I think we should discuss. So these two forms, one taking class of T and another taking generic type of T, are similar, but they have different purposes. So the question is when to use the method taking class of T and when to use the method taking generic type of T. Now both class of T and generic type of T are used to specify the type of the returned response. So if we are returning a single object which is not a collection from our resource method, then we can use this class of T form to specify the type of the returned response. Like if we are returning user object, then we need to specify its type as user.class. Let's see how to do that. something like this. But if the resource method is returning a collection like list of user, then we can't use this class of t form to specify the type. If we try to use it, then it will be something like this. But the resource method had actually returned list of user, and that was not a simple list. But if we specify something like this, it will go as a simple list. So in this case, if you try to use this class of t, this will not make complete sense. So in this case, where resource method is returning a collection, we should be using generic type t, not class of t. Now, how to use that generic type uh, class? We actually can't instantiate that generic type directly because this class has a protected constructor. So we need to extend this generic type class and call its constructor from the subclass constructor. Generally, we do this by anonymously extending generic type class and creating its object. And the syntax for that would be like this. So here we are trying to extend anonymously generic type of list of user class and then create its object and pass it to the post method. So here we are passing this list of user type, the type of the return response, wrapping around the generic type class. Okay, so that was about how to pass the request using the overloaded post method. Now there is one more way to pass this request to the web service, and that is by calling entity method. We'll remove these stubs here. We'll have only the client response here. Okay. So instead of using the overloaded post method, we can use the entity method and pass the request object here. We'll get this username from the JSP and pass the same thing here in the entity method. And we can also specify the content type of the request which we want to send. Here we want to send the plain text, so the media type will be plain text. Okay. Now let's build both the projects. And test this out. run this JSP on server. Okay, so we got the response as processed Ratnesh, and we are successfully able to pass the request to the web service method. Now let's try to pass some XML to the web service method, and in our resource method we would accept it as string only. So we'll get that XML as string here. We just need to specify that our method consumes XML. So we need to put that in @consumes annotation as application underscore XML. Now rest of the code would remain the same. Let's change the client code to send XML. So what we'll do, in our JSP we have username and email. We'll get these two parameters and we'll use them to create one user object, and we'll send the same user object in XML format to the web service. Let's create this user class. It has two fields, user ID and email. Let's have the getters and setters. Come back to the client code. We need to pass this user object in the entity method. And media type should be XML. So we are specifying that the content type of the request should be XML. So this user object will be converted to XML and then sent as a request. For converting user object to XML, we need to annotate our user class. with JAX-B annotation. Now let's build the projects. Okay, now let's test this out. Okay, so now we are able to successfully pass our object as XML to the web service, and same XML is getting returned back to the client. So we are getting that XML. Now there are a few things which we should know about this annotation, that this annotation is not a mandatory annotation. Even if we don't specify this in our code, the code will work fine, and our web service method will accept everything in its parameter. So it is just used to put some restriction on what type of data should be passed to our parameter and reject all the others. So if the client is sending some other type, then an error would be thrown, and that error is 415 unsupported media type. Let's test this error. Our web service code is accepting XML, so just let our client code send JSON. So now the content type of the request would be JSON, and Jersey will use the same JAX-B annotation of the user class to convert user object to JSON, and that JSON data would be passed to the process input method here. But this method is only consuming XML, so we are going to get some error here. Let's test it out. We'll build this client project. Okay, so you can see that we got this error 415 unsupported media type. So this is it for this video. We'll see some more things of the RESTful web service in next video. Thanks for watching.